Welcome everyone to the August 2022 meeting of the Garden State Vintage Stock Car Club. And our very special guest tonight is Harry Reid, who has been a racing car owner, car builder, winning race driver, and he's won as a car owner and a mechanic. And this past year, he was inducted into the Garden State Vintage Stock Car Club Hall of Fame. Welcome to Harry Reid. Harry, great to have you here tonight. Your first time as an invited guest on the microphone. And we'll start off as we ask all of our guests. Of course, we know you as I mentioned, as a winning mechanic, car builder, driver. But what led you into auto racing as a young guy many years ago? What actually inspired you to become part of it?
Believe it or not, my wife.
Okay.
We were still going out long before we got married, and I was drag racing at the time, and her aunt said, you ought to get Harry to take you to the Wall Stadium. So she pestered me a couple weeks, and we went, and I don't think we missed many Saturdays since. Yeah, and that's where it started. You know, she said, let's go to the stock car races.
Well, back it up a little bit more. You said you were a drag racer, I presume, at Raceway Park in Englishtown?
Yeah, we were just fooling around with street car stuff,
Okay.
Nothing professional. But I was born in Englishtown, so
I
I used to walk there.
Oh, okay.
You got up to.
So you ran basically like a street car, like bracket racing?
Back then there was no bracket racing, it was just,
the,
you know, pick a guy that was close to your speed and just
Okay.
race them. It was mainly just for fun, we weren't doing it for any money.
So you were always the kind of guy who liked being under the hood of a car, fine-tuning the motor, that kind of thing?
I've been fooling with bicycles since I was old enough to walk, and I just kept going from there.
So when you first went to Wall Stadium, again, like you said, you've missed very few Saturday nights since then. You were there obviously as a fan at first. What led you to decide, well, maybe I should get a race car and go out on the track?
Well, I was watching them, and you know, I told my wife, I said, I'd like to try this. I said, I think we could do this. And I had a cousin that had an old coupe body. It was just the body and the frame, and he gave it to me. And it took me a few months, and I got it into something that resembled a race car. And I said, we'll try it. And we're still doing it.
This was early 70s, mid 70s?
First, it was 73 when I got the car. I started racing in the first race of 74, the sportsman car.
Now, I recall you with two numbers before the 55, which of course your son Stephen drives now, but 7A and 14, what were the significance of those numbers with race cars?
Well, I started out as 55. In 1974, that was my car number. It was a blue 55. And I kept that number. The 7A belonged to a guy I drove for about 5 years, Jerry McCarthy. And the 14, that was Stan Wall's number. And I was driving for him at New Egypt when Kevin and Doug were promoting New Egypt. We had a mad car, sportsman car, whatever it was.
That was Kevin Ayers and Doug Walcott?
And Doug Walcott, yep. That was his number. And kept that number for, you know, pretty much all the time until I finished racing, because when Steven wanted to go, he wanted a 55. So, but my number's always been 55.
Of course, the blue 55, as you said, you started with that. Is there a significance there, or is that just a number that they picked for you to run?
No, actually, my wife, like I said, she was heavily involved from the beginning, and she wanted 2. And we sat watching. Well, we can't have 2. There was a 2, and she said, well, we'll go 22. And I went up to Marion O'Rourke, and I said, I want to register a number. And I said, I want 22. And she said, that's taken. And she gave me the sheet, and I looked down, and I was looking at it backwards, and 55 was 2 upside down 2s. I said, that'll work.
That's great.
So that was it.
That's become a family signature ever since.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's terrific. Did it take you, well, of course you said you were a drag racer, you went to Wall as a fan. Did it take you long to start getting used to running the high bank track?
No, not really. The first year, the car I had was terrible. It was just a piece of junk. And I drove it. I had Stan Wall take it out. I had George Call take it out. John Malsbury took it out. And everybody told me just cut it up, John. You know. So we struggled through that through the first season, and then I cut it up. So, and then I got married that next spring, and I took that year off to build the car. And in fact, we built it in John Malsbury's garage. He offered to help me, and we built it. Came back the next year, and pretty much been there ever since.
Now that was a number 55 also?
Yes, yeah, it was a Vega.
Okay, Vega, and was that a motor that you built yourself?
Originally the motor in it was mine, and then I found that I didn't know so much about circle track motors, and blew it up, and I blew it up again, and then I went to Ronnie Buck, and he kind of straightened me out. And over the years I've built my own motors. My brother-in-law's built them with me, and then then I got lazy and let somebody else build them.
Now for our listeners, who's your brother-in-law?
Andy Olenny, he's my wife's brother, but he's no longer, he moved down to South Carolina a few years ago. But he built pretty much the best motors I ever had for years. You know, we used to have Merkel on the hood, because Jack would do all our machine work, but every one of the motors were built right in my garage.
Now I know, and even today, and we'll get into, of course, your career with your son Stephen, but I know you and Stephen have always taken great pride, even when you have a chassis from a manufacturer, that you take that pride in doing the work yourself and putting a car together and getting those results.
I always enjoyed building cars. I like to tinker with them. I like to have something different than everybody else has. And after I stopped driving, that was really all the enjoyment I got anymore, was working on them. And Stephen's involved with me. He works with me all the time. Now we fight all the time about which idea is better. But it's part of the game. Some guys want to be great drivers. Some guys want to be great engine guys. I just like to do it all myself.
So when you first started racing, success began to come to you. As noted, you have excellent number of 32 wins at Wall Stadium. Modified wins. Do you recall that first win?
Very well.
Oh, okay. Tell us about that very first win, because that's something very special to a driver, and I'm sure your wife Lynn too.
My very first win was in a sportsman car, and I was running second to Jeffrey Walcott. And we had a good car, but he was a couple car lengths out ahead of me, and we got 5 to go, and I was catching him, but I wasn't going to pass him. We went down into the first turn, and I just seen him go spinning. Won the race.
Wow.
I mean, he was 2 cars ahead of me, and, but I saw he was in the mirror like this when he went into the corner. So, okay. So that was 1976, I guess.
That must have been quite a feeling for you, though. Even forgetting how much it paid back then, which wasn't a whole lot, I'm sure, but it must have been just a feeling of accomplishment. Yeah, we did this.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd ever win a feature to start with, and my wife and I were talking before we got married, and my goal in life was to buy a house, have some kids, and I'd really like to win a sportsman feature,
Yeah.
So we've kind of covered all of that.
Now, you stayed with the Wall Stadium Sportsman for a number of years before you went into the modified division. Along with Wall, when did you start running at New Egypt and North Farmington?
New Egypt, I ran on 79. I was driving for Jerry McCarthy in the 7A, and that winter I built a brand new car, and it was a good car. We actually ran that car 3 nights a week, every week, and 4 nights a week, once a month. We would run Wednesday night at New Egypt, Saturday night at Wall, Sunday at Pleasantville, and once a month we'd go to Evergreen.
Wow.
We ran a lot of races that one year. Thank God it was his money, not mine.
Same car.
Same car. We'd buy 1 set of tires and run 2 weeks at all the tracks.
Did Did you have to make many changes between Wall, New Egypt, and of course Pleasantville was a half mile, Evergreen was a flat third? Make many changes?
Actually, Evergreen and Wall were pretty close. New Egypt, we'd soften it up. And Atlantic City, we didn't do much other than change the gear. You know. Atlantic City was so rough, you never really got a hold of the racetrack anyway. You just drove it.
Do you recall who, let's go back to the Sportsman days, when you first started. Who were, along with Jeff Walcott, for example, who were some of the tough competitors you ran against back in that era?
This old bastard sitting here was one of the tough ones.
Who would that be?
Ray.
Ray Shea?
Ray Shea, Pete Cobb, Chip Graves was tough. Larry Patterson.
Terry Van?
Terry and I never really raced much.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why. He was in and out different times. But I'd say Larry Patterson and I ran quite a few years together. Chip Graves and Pete Cobb. Boy, there was a ton of them.
Oh, great names. I remember Brian Ellison was another name.
Yeah, he had actually bought Hoffman's Coupe.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think I was just about moving up by the time he got going.
As a young driver, just starting out at Wall Stadium, when you had that first car, were you a little hesitant to go over to other top drivers, veteran drivers, and ask for advice?
No, actually I wasn't, because I knew Charlie Kramer and I knew Dick Barney from the transmission business, because we were doing work for him. And whenever I had a question about the chassis, which I knew nothing, I'd go over to Dick and say, the car's doing this, what should I do? And he'd say, do that. Didn't explain nothing to you, he said, do that.
Yep.
And
It worked?
It always did, and that went on, believe it or not, for quite a few years. You learn a little bit all the time, but whenever I was stuck, I'd go over to Dick and say, the car's doing this, what should I do? Well, then one night we were going really good, and I got by Cisco and left them. And a couple weeks later, I went over to Dick. I said, hey, the car's doing this. And he says, you're fast enough, kid. School's out. And that was the end of it. So that night, Lenny Boyd and I were sitting in Double J's having a beer after the races, and I was pissed because I said, what am I going to do now if I got trouble? I asked Lenny, I said, this was like 1983 maybe. And I asked Lenny, I said, who do you talk to about the chassis when you got a problem? He says, no one. I said, what do you mean no one? He says, I let the chassis tell me what it needs, and that's what I do. Well, that was the last time I asked anybody for help with a race car. And I bought every book I could find and read everything I could find. I talked to a lot of people. Lenny and I would talk a lot, and eventually I guess you figure out what they do.
Interesting. And it seemed to work.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time our cars go pretty decent.
Yeah. What led you to make the move up into a modified car?
Actually, I wanted to stay sportsman one more year, but I was driving for Jerry, and he was trying to run the race car through the business, and his accountant told him, you couldn't be spending the amount of money you're spending on a sportsman car for the purse you're running for.
Yeah.
So you either got to get out or move up. So he said, I want you to drive, but we got to move up. So I said, okay, we'll move up. So that was it. It was 1980 we moved up.
Same car with just a modified motor?
Yeah, it was probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. I took a sportsman car with a small block, obviously, and we could go out there and run, at that time, 14 seconds, 13.9 on a good lap. And had a big block, put a big block in it, and put a dry sump in it, and put disc brakes on it. And I didn't break 14.4 until August.
Wow.
There was a big difference between driving a big block and a small block.
Did the modifieds and sportsmen back then have the same tire?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in
Not
theory,
really.
you figured this all should have worked, but it didn't.
No, well, them big blocks, they were a handful,
For new listeners, when you talk about a big block motor back then, what was the cubic inch?
433 cubic inches, and we were making just short of 800 horsepower.
Wow. That's,
And today, we're making about 550.
Mhm.
So they went down the straightaway
Oh,
like
yeah.
hell, you know?
what was it like for you? You said you had spoken with guys like, Dick Barney as a car owner, Charlie Kremer, for example. What was it like when you went out on the track as a young modified driver? You look over and there's Gil Hearn in the 12, and there's Charlie Kremer in the 77, Jim Hendrickson with the X3. What did you think?
Well, I always felt that they were in my opinion, Gil Hearn, Charlie, and Jim Hendrickson, they were all great drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't in the same class with any of them guys. I was just happy to be out there.
Mm-hmm.
And, eventually you get going, after time you get better and better,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them retired and moved on. But, I moved up to modified in 1980. And the group of guys that were racing back then, we always had differences off and on, but
Mm-hmm.
in 1980, when I moved up, I had a race against Hearn, Siscone, John Blewett, Jerry Kramer. And when we left there after 92,
Mm-hmm.
I was still racing against Hearn, Siscone,
Yeah.
the same guys. We were there every Saturday night for
Right.
years.
Mm-hmm.
And you had your differences off and on, but overall,
That's great.
we got along,
Respect.
Yeah, it was different then.
Mhm.
There's just a lot of reasons for that, but
Mhm.
back then the cars were big difference. Like the fast guys to the slow guys, there might be a second difference.
Mhm.
Now there's 100.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a lot tougher to pass. And back then you give a guy a tap going down the straightaway, and they would give you a lane. They wouldn't give you the spot, but they'd
Right.
give you a lane.
Mhm.
Now it's just push me down the straightaway. Well, thanks for the push.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's different.
And of course, back in that era too, that's sort of when the transition was beginning, where it wasn't manufactured chassis, for example. You guys had to still build your own. A lot of if you wrecked a car, you had to go home and fix it.
Yeah, when I started racing, you either built your own car or you bought somebody else's car.
Mhm.
There was no Troyer or anything else like that. And the first car I got was an old car, and then I've pretty much built my own cars since then.
Yeah, exactly. When did you? Well, let's go back to the modifieds. Do you recall that first modified win?
Yeah, it was a twin 30 night. We were having twin features, and I had a pole shot. I knew I had a pole shot, and I got out good. And Martin Truex Sr. was behind me, and he could give me a little tap right in the center of the corner, and I never drove in my life. But
Power steering back then?
yeah, we had
Okay. And which was that, the 7A or the 14?
7A.
7A.
Yeah.
Okay. So from there, Harry Reid became a Wall Stadium modified winner, and just went from there.
Yeah, we had, I went through the 80s, and in 89 I got a Troyer chassis and did what I wanted to do to it. And we had a good car, 89, 90, 91, 92. I think we won 12 or 14 what I call real modified races. And, I felt I was doing as good as I ever did then.
Right.
And then we went to Flemington, and then that was a whole different ballgame for me.
My next question, coming from high banks of wall, which for a short track is very fast, going to Flemington Speedway, where it was freshly paved, a whole new challenge for everyone, both as a longtime driver at that point and car builder, someone who knows how to set up cars. What was the challenge of Flemington?
Flemington is a very unique racetrack, and it scared the hell out of me.
Really?
Yeah, I never got comfortable there. I never felt good. I always felt like I was on the edge. And I had run Pocono on a 3/4 mile track, and the speed didn't bother me at all. But there was just something about Flemington that and I kept saying, it's the car, it's the car, it's the car. And we would change stuff and change stuff and change stuff, and I just couldn't go any faster. And I felt like I was on ice the whole time I was out there. And we were there, we had rented the track one day, and Pete was there.
Pete Britton?
Pete Britton. And I said, Pete, do me a favor. Take this thing out and tell me what you think. Well, he went out and he went a full second faster than I did.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there looking, he come in and he was smiling. He says, it's a good car. So I said, okay, thanks. And I told my brother, put in a trailer.
Really?
Yeah. And riding home from Flemington, and I didn't say nothing to anybody. I got home, and my wife asked me, says, well, did you figure the car out? I said, yep. She said, you find a problem? I said, yep. He said, oh, good. I said, I'm going to call Britton. And she looked at me, she said, what are you talking about? I said, the driver's the problem. I said, no, I'm not going to drive it. So she said, well, why are you going to have it? I said, listen, we've always been the same thing. If the motor was bad, we changed the motor. If the chassis was bad, we changed the chassis. The driver's bad. So we put Pete in the car, and we won track championship, got a bunch of races with it. So it worked out well.
Was that the last time you actually drove a race car
No.
at Flemington?
At Flemington, yeah. I took it out a few times when Pete was driving it, and you know, we had two cars. I would qualify the other car. Couldn't wait to get out of it. I had no interest in driving whatsoever, and yeah, we'd be coming home and, you know, won the feature, and I couldn't tell you, the only difference going on the ride home, whether Pete won or I won, was I wasn't sweating.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so I felt good, and I never had a problem with it.
Now, there's times over the years I talked to drivers that, you know, they felt that when their driving career ended, they couldn't even go to the track anymore. They just, you know, they didn't want to be there. But you already had that in the back of your mind that, hey, I kind of enjoy building them and wrenching. You had no trouble watching Pete Britton win when you were in the pits with a feeling of satisfaction?
No, not at all. I mean, you know, I had other people that won. You know, Pete won a lot of races for me. Lenny obviously won the Race of Champions.
Lenny Boyd.
Lenny Boyd. Robert Schwetlig won the Garden State Classic in one of my cars. And it never bothered me not to drive. You know, I always felt that it's the whole package, you know, not all just about the drive. And I enjoyed working on the cars, and, you know, I enjoyed having things that other people didn't have. And, you know, when people would ask you, where'd you get that? I just tell them I made it.
There you go.
You know.
Well, you came back to run Wall Stadium in the 90s with the 14, as I recall, your own 14. Right? That's Stan Walls. Stan Walls. So you came back as a driver, so you weren't done yet. Okay, take us through that era now. As you came back from Flemington, you ran at Wall, back in the driver's seat and still winning.
Yeah, well, we had that car that we were running with at New Egypt, and I would run it at Wall, even when we were at Flemington, like Turkey Derbies a couple different times. It was an older Troyer car, and it wasn't bad. I won a few races in it. And then Flemington was closing up.
Right.
So I'm reading the rule book for their current Wall mods, and I read it like 3 times, and I told my wife, I says, I gotta build another car.
Okay.
She says, why? I says, there's too many rules in this book that are wrong, you know. So over that winter, 99 to 2000, I had to build the chassis and everything, because I wanted it so different, I had to start from scratch.
Okay.
And I won a lot of races with that car.
Yeah.
It was, you know, when they changed the rule book from the big modifieds to the Wall modifieds, they left the same tread width in, and you know, the car could be 90 inches wide, and there was too many gaps not to take advantage of.
Yeah.
And I couldn't buy anything like that. I had to build it to make it what we wanted.
So that chassis was designed and built literally right in your shop there in Freehold.
Yep, we built 7 of them.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, every one of them won.
Yeah. Back then, from start to finish, from the time Harry Reid looked at the thoughts in his mind, like, okay, I'm going to design this chassis, to the time the last bolt was turned, how long did it take you to put that all together?
The first chassis I started on probably in October, and we had it there for April.
Very good.
And then after that, by the 6th or 7th one, we could put one together in about 3 months.
Very good.
I gotta figure I was still working full-time for a living, so
Yeah.
I was only at night.
On that topic of working for a living, you seemingly have always been involved in the transmission business. Is that your specialty?
Yes, since 1972, that's all I've done is transmissions.
Your own business and then working for others?
I worked for Bay Transmission for Stan Wall. Actually, I started working for his father in '72. Worked for them until they retired and sold the business about 8 years ago. And I stayed with the building,
Yeah.
you know, and then I did the race car trannies on the at night, you know. That was a big mistake at the beginning. The racer in me should have not let that override the businessman, because I come out with a 2-speed transmission 4 years before Old Man Engineering did.
Wow.
But it was so much better, and I never got beat on a restart, and I didn't tell anybody what I did.
Yeah.
And it was about 4 years later, he was finally selling them to people. I said, well, I guess I'll sell them now.
Yeah.
For a long time, I had something nobody else had.
Yeah.
I just kept it to myself. I should have just went in
Oh,
business
yeah.
then.
Did a lot of other racers pick up on that product, and did you sell to a lot of others?
Yeah, I would say 99% of Wall Stadium, and back the regular Whalen Tour, up until they allowed Jericho's there, I had about 75% of that field, and pretty much all the sportsman cars.
And what was the actual corporate name?
RTE.
And you're still wearing that RTE shirt, very,
Yeah.
very classic.
Yeah.
Well, along about, let's see, your son Stephen is how old?
38.
Okay, so let's backtrack 38 years, add a few here and there. Young son Stephen, growing up around racing, I'm sure hung out in the shop with you. At what point did he decide, or did you decide that he was going to become a race driver?
I think he decided that when he was old enough to walk. I mean, he was in the garage from the time he could walk.
That's great.
He learned his fractions putting drill bits away.
Wow, that's awesome.
You know, and we just figured, you know, when he's ready, I'll quit and go on from there. And that's pretty much what we did. You know, the last couple of years I was driving, I was still enjoying myself, but you know, Van Dusen used to be on the radio with me, and I pushed the button. You know, how's Steven doing? Don't worry about him. Pass the guy. All right, next lap.
Like a real dad.
Yeah. And then they cut the purse back one winter, and I just told my wife, I said, we can't afford 2 of these,
Yeah.
so I'll stop. And that was it, stopped.
There was never any Harry Reid retirement tour, it was just that you decided that that was
Yeah.
it.
I wasn't that good in either tour.
Getting back to Flemington for a minute, Harry, you talked about Lenny Boyd winning the Race of Champions in the 55. Tell us how that all came about. I know you and Lenny go back many years.
Hold on, Harry. Someone's talking to you.
Okay, this is good.
Say hello.
Oh my God. What
Glenn
are you
Sullivan.
doing, old man?
Harry,
Glenn
what's
Sullivan.
going on here? I'm getting older and older.
I know.
Harry's gonna tell a funny story now about.
Listen, Kevin and I were talking. What happened that time at Wall Stadium when you went running up to the tower to complain and I called you on the
Yeah, I know. I'll tell him.
Well, this should be a good
You
story.
gotta tell that story. That was the greatest.
It's being coordinated by Kevin Ayers for Glenn Sullivan.
You know, up
All
to the
right.
tower, and I called this thing and asked to speak to Harry.
Yeah.
All right, Harry, gotta tell us this one.
Yeah, it was, back I was running, it was in the early 2000s. I don't think Steven was driving yet. And we started the feature, double file, obviously, initial start, and they wrecked in the first turn. Now, I had started 7th, and 2 cars in the front wrecked. So they line us up, and I'm 9th.
How'd that happen?
So I pull around.
Okay.
I'm talking to the starter, yelling to the starter. He calls up there, blah, 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 back and forth. 9th.
Okay.
Go around, I stop again. And there was a car that was going to restart 2 cars ahead of me. And I knew he was going to wreck. And I'm hot. I'm saying, how the hell is this possible?
Yeah.
Oh, Frank Antonov's back then was the score.
Frank, yes.
Yeah. So we get to green, and I got balled up going first.
Oh,
time.
no.
Yeah.
You knew it was gonna happen.
Yep, and I knew it. I drove around, I pulled off the racetrack, right in front of the starter stand, shut the car off, got out of the car, walked across the track, up the starter stand, up the grandstands. I was going to the tower and I was gonna kill Frank. Well, at the time I get to the tower, I didn't find this out till later, Sullivan's in the grandstands. He calls the racetrack, the main office, and he says, "Can I speak to Harry?" And they said, "There's no Harry here. He will be in a second." So anyway, I never got a hold of Frank. I just did some screaming. That was the end of it. But they put a rule in about that. You can't do that anymore.
That's a great story. Well, thanks to Kevin and Glenn for recalling that. That's very good. Getting back to Lenny Boyd driving your car to the Race of Champions victory. Tell us about that.
Well, what had happened was the Race of Champions actually got postponed a week. And I had ran wall, and 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the end of the season, I flipped. And we cut half the car apart, replaced the car. I came back the next week and we won the feature. But I had a black roof on it and the body panels were all nasty, and I just parked it. So I will worry about it, Turkey Derby. And I went to the Race of Champions the first week, and Lenny was in the 60 of Hoffman.
Oh, yes.
And I'm watching the races, and I said, boy, these guys, asphalt cars, they're way off on the line. I said, you know, Lenny's the only one running the right groove around here and going fast.
Yeah.
Well, then it rained out. And then Hoffman was going to drive that car the next week. So I was sitting Monday, and I called Lenny up. I said, "You got a ride?" He said, "No." I said, "You want to ride this shitbox?" So he says, "Yeah." So I said, "Well, come on over. We'll get you fitted." And he come over, and in the garage, he doesn't live that far from me. He fit in there okay. We got it ready. He says, "Well, I'll buy one set of tires, you buy one set of tires, and we'll see what we do." And, that's the way it started.
Did he have to requalify because he switched cars?
Yeah, actually, the whole show got rained out. It was
Oh, okay.
a complete new show. Yeah, so I mean, the car was good, you know, and Lenny knew, you know, what he wanted in the car. I think we made 1 or 2 spring changes in practice, and that was really my first opportunity to be on the radio.
Oh, okay.
You know, talking to another driver.
You spotted for him during the race?
Yeah. And we clicked, you know. I'm watching the race, and you know, he was more competitive than I expect us to be. And he's running 8th or 10th, something like that. And I'm watching the race unfold, and he was behind Wayne Anderson. And Wayne was backing up. And I got on the radio, I said, you know, "You got anything?" "Yeah, we're just riding." So I said, "You got to get by Anderson." So he rode another couple laps, and then I said, "You got to get by this guy." Well, he went around him, and then he caught the pack.
Right.
And then, you know, tell him what I'm seeing, you know, as being able, from driving.
Yeah.
And we just got along good together, and he'll tell you as well as my, you know, that was a turning point of that race. You know, once I got him past him, and then you know, we got to 5th, and I'm looking at the board. I said, "Look at that, we're going to finish a top 5 car," you know. And then we got the 4th, and then the 3rd, and then the 2nd. And I said, "Oh my goodness!"
Yeah.
So it was a good night.
Well, Lenny's always said that was a great feeling for him, obviously, as a driver. For you as an owner, the guy who was the mechanic, that must have been pretty cool to win the Race of Champions.
Yeah, like I said, we never expected to win.
Yeah.
You know, never in a million years. We were hoping to cover the tire bill, you know. But it was unexpected, but, you know, and that was a good paying race.
Oh,
so,
yeah, definitely. Bill, moving ahead several years, getting back to son Stephen, grew up around the race shop. The 55 is in there, right, as his first car, as I recall. Stephen just started right out in a modified, never went to a lower division. Did he run karts or anything?
No.
Just right in, jumped right into modified. Is that your thought or his?
That was his decision. Stephen had a go-kart from the time he was 2 years old, just for around the yard and
Yeah.
stuff. And then I took him to the quarter midget track when he was about 6 or 7. And we sat there and we watched him go around for about a half hour. And he looks at me and he said, "That's fast they go?"
How old was he?
Maybe 7,
Mhm.
6 or 7. I said, "Yep, I'll wait." So he waited, you know, and you know, he was 16, 17. Back then he had to wait till he was 18. And this was like in the early 2000s, so I still had that 14 car, the Troyer car that Robert was driving once in a while, and I had built my new car. And then he thought he was going to get that car, and then I sold it. And then he was pouting around for a while, and I said, "Don't worry about it, we'll build another one." So the year before he was 18, I built another one for him. And
Now, was Stephen working right with you in the shop to build that new car?
yeah, back then he didn't do a whole lot of fabricating. He would, you know, do whatever you told him to do, but
He's always been excellent at that fabrication.
yeah, over the years, he's actually the sheet metal. He's better than I am at it. But back then, when he was first starting, he wasn't doing too much of the fabricating. You know, he started with a grinder.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So he was, you know, you guys put that first car together. When did Stephen first take it on the track? A practice session?
What happened was his birthday was in March, so that April was the first week of practice, and I had my car and that car. So I told him, I said, "Oh, we'll take it to the track," and I said, "I'm taking it out first." I got in it, and I went to the top of the board in the practice, and I come in and I said, "The car can win. Don't tell me there's nothing wrong with the car. If it's pushing or it's loose, figure out how to drive it."
Wow.
And that's what he did.
Tough love.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was, you know, we cut 10 years off his learning curve.
Yeah.
You know, he was, very few people were able to sit in a car that, you know, I think you see that a lot with the second generation drivers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they're better than the old man a lot of times.
Well, you and he made quite a team, you know, when we talk about you guys on Saturday night on the microphone, we always say, obviously, Stephen Reed, the driver, crew chief, co-builder, co-fabricator, Harry Reed. You said you guys, you know, let's say fight a lot, but I'm sure it's just spirited discussion, let's say.
We don't fight. We argue over chassis setups.
Okay.
You know, and sometimes he's right, sometimes he's not. The older he's getting, the more I'm backing off of it. Let him. You know, the last couple of years, he's pretty much, he does what he wants to do. He scales it the way he wants to scale it, and until it gets messed up, he doesn't talk to me about it. And then we'll work on it again. But I mean, I still work on the car every week.
Yeah.
Normal stuff, take care of the motor, make sure everything's right. So.
Well, again, between your 32 victories and 2 weeks ago, Stephen got his 38th modified win at Wall. 70 wins for Harry and Stephen Reed Racing at Wall Stadium. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, means a lot. Any regrets to this point in your career?
No, I have no regrets really. I think I've accomplished a lot more than I set out to do. And you know, what people don't realize, a lot of this sport is the people in it.
Yes.
You know, the longer you're in it, it's, you know, you do what you can do. On the racetrack's one thing, but you know, when you're off the racetrack, I mean, I try to help as many people as I can. You know, I do as much work in the pits on other cars as I do on my own. So it's good.
If there was a Saturday night, Wall Stadium was racing, and you weren't there, would you be kind of miserable? It's like, this is where I have to be at a Saturday night?
Nah, I don't know. The older I get, I mean, we enjoy going out to dinner now.
Nice.
There's no racing, so I mean, I still want to be able to go there,
Yeah.
you know, 15 times a year, but I don't need to go 40.
Yeah. You mentioned multiple times your wife, Lynn. She's been kind of your rock right from the start.
Yeah, she's been involved right from the beginning. You know, she's kind of tough to deal with sometimes. Like, she gets on Stephen, and you know, I told Stephen, I said, it's because she's so involved. You know, it doesn't matter what happens, you know, if the car don't run good, she's the first one you're gonna hear it from, so. But she's very involved. She does a lot more than people understand or know.
Along with your wife Lynn, and obviously Stephen, who else would you like to thank or give recognition to for being by your side, being involved all these years?
Well, my brother-in-law Andy, like I said, for 25 years or so, he was always there doing a lot. My brothers have helped me off and on during the years, and several different people. Little Bruce has been with me now the last 5 or 6 years. He's my neighbor, and he's a big help to me now.
Alan Van Dusen, another name from the past?
Yeah, Alan never worked on my cars, but when I went back to Wall in 2000, I needed a spotter, and Alan and I had been known each other for years, and he wasn't doing anything, and I just got him a spot for him. So we had a
That's great.
good relationship.
Very good. Well, we have questions in the audience for Harry Reid. Okay, I guess you covered all the
Yes.
all the areas there, so no questions from the audience. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up. Harry, congratulations on a great career. As noted before, you're a Hall of Fame member of the Garden State Vintage Stock Car Club. And we'll kind of wrap it up with that. Nice accomplishment for your career to be honored by Garden State.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, our special guest, Harry Reid.